She hissed, "Get him out of here. Now." I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "You want to talk about ruining a perfect image? Let's talk about how you faked your entire life and hoped no one would ever find out. I, 34 male, have a younger sister who's 27, and she's always been kind of dramatic, but this time she went way too far. I have a 10-year-old son who has cerebral palsy. He mostly uses a wheelchair and sometimes needs a bit of extra help, but he's super sweet, well-behaved, and loves being part of family gatherings. My wife and I do everything we can to make sure he feels included and valued, and most of my relatives have always been nice about it. My sister, though, decided that her wedding theme and photos mattered more than including her nephew, and that's how this whole blow-up started. I first found out something was up when the wedding invitations arrived. They were fancy, with everyone's names printed in calligraphy, except my son's. At first, I assumed it was an oversight. No big deal. Maybe the stationer messed up. So I texted my sister and said, "Hey, I think you forgot to add my son's name. We're planning to come as a family. That okay?" She took a couple days to answer, then called me, sounding really awkward. She basically said she didn't want him there, because this was going to be a formal event, and she didn't want any distractions in photos. I asked her what that meant, and she mumbled something about color schemes and aesthetics. It was so shallow I thought I'd misheard. But no, she actually felt my kid's wheelchair would mess up her perfect photo lineup. I told her that was absolutely messed up. She started telling me I was overreacting, that she'd been planning this day for a year, and everyone was supposed to look a certain way in pictures. I couldn't believe she was banning her own nephew, just to keep her decor on point. After we hung up, I told my wife, and she was outraged. We talked about boycotting the wedding, but I also thought maybe we could reason with my sister if we got other relatives involved. My father and mother were shocked when I told them. My father threatened to pull any money he was contributing to her wedding expenses. My mother said she'd try to talk some sense into her. Turns out my sister had already been on the phone with a bunch of extended family, spinning the story that I was forcing her to accommodate my son in a venue that wouldn't be comfortable for him. She made it sound like I was pushing him into an event that would overwhelm him, which was pure nonsense. My son's been to weddings and large gatherings before, and we know how to keep him comfortable. Some older relatives told me that maybe my sister had point about the formal vibe, or that a child with special needs might get too tired. Others said they didn't want to pick sides and just hoped we'd work it out. My mother-in-law and father-in-law were furious when they heard about this. My mother-in-law said she didn't care how big a day it was. "You never exclude a child from a family event." My father-in-law offered to help us host a separate party so our son wouldn't feel left out. But the more I heard about my sister's attitude, the angrier I got. She was basically telling people that my son would draw too much attention away from her, like a 10-year-old in a wheelchair is going to hijack the wedding. It made my blood boil. Then I remembered some skeletons in her own closet, this huge mess she got into years ago. She had lied about her education, claimed she had a master's degree from a fancy school, even faked some award certificates to impress a boyfriend who was well-connected. Long story short, the guy found out, dumped her, and our parents had to pay for legal help because she'd fudged official documents for her job applications. It was a huge scandal in our family. We promised never to bring it up again because she said she was ashamed and wanted a fresh start. But now she was acting all high and mighty about appearances, and it seemed so hypocritical. My wife basically said, if she wants to humiliate our kid by excluding him, maybe it's time she sees what humiliation feels like. I wasn't proud of wanting revenge, but I felt like I needed to stand up for my son in a big way. After a lot of sleepless nights, I decided that if she tried to push us out of the wedding or publicly insult my son, I'd call her out on her past lies right then and there. Some people will say that's petty, but excluding a child with a disability for vanity is worse than petty. It's cruel. The wedding day arrived. It was in this fancy hotel ballroom. My wife and I dressed up, got my son ready in a little suit, and we headed over. I could feel my heart pounding. My father met me at the entrance, looking stressed. He said my sister was in one of her moods. I asked if she knew we were bringing my son, and he just nodded grimly. Sure enough, the minute we walked in, people started whispering. My sister's fiancé saw us and hurried over, looking all nervous. He said something like, "Can we work out a compromise?" I told him that my son and I were here to celebrate, just like everyone else. No compromise needed. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he backed off when my father-in-law and mother-in-law showed up to stand with us. We found seats near the front where our family was supposed to be. Some relatives smiled at my son, told him how nice he looked, and that helped me relax a bit. But then my sister appeared, fully decked out in her bridal gown, hair done up perfectly, expression like thunder. She came right over and hissed, "What are you doing?" I said, "We're sitting in our seats for your wedding." She told me to move to the back, or better yet, leave my son in some side room, because she didn't want his wheelchair visible in the aisle photos. I refused. She started yelling that I was going to ruin her day, and that the pictures were planned meticulously. I told her if she didn't want to cause a scene, maybe she should stop making a scene. That's when she called over the hotel security. This was right before the ceremony was supposed to begin, so guests were watching, looking uncomfortable. Security didn't know what to do. My wife explained that this was our son's rightful place, and that trying to kick him out was discrimination. My sister was freaking out, telling the security guys to remove us so her vision wouldn't be messed up. That's when I stood up and said, loud enough for a bunch of guests to hear, "If you want to talk about messing up visions, let's talk about how you messed up your own life by lying about your entire background a few years ago. Or did you think we all forgot about that?" My sister's face went pale. The fiancé looked completely blindsided. Guests started whispering, and my sister tried to shut me up, but I kept going. "You think my son's wheelchair is an eyesore, but you had no problem faking degrees and awards to make yourself look good. If you want to exclude my kid for your wedding pictures, maybe everyone here deserves to know you're not some perfect bride either." She burst into tears and ran out of the room, practically ripping the hem of her gown as she went. The fiancés followed her, demanding to know what I was talking about. I felt a rush of adrenaline, anger, and weird relief all at once. Part of me thought, good, now she gets how it feels. Another part of me felt bad for causing a scene at someone's wedding, but I wasn't about to stand by and let her treat my son like that. My wife and I gathered our stuff and started to leave. A few relatives were comforting my son, some telling me I did the right thing, others saying I went too far. By the time we got to the lobby, the whole ceremony was in chaos. My uncle texted me later, saying my sister had a breakdown, accusing me of ruining her life, while her fiancé was furious she'd kept all those lies hidden from him. Apparently they still went through with the shortened ceremony, but a bunch of guests left, and the reception was a disaster. A few older relatives chewed me out for airing dirty laundry, but even they admitted my sister had crossed a major line by excluding a disabled nephew. Over the next few days, everything blew up on social media. My sister posted a dramatic rant about betrayal and how I had attacked her on her wedding day. She conveniently left out that she tried to ban my son. She turned off comments so nobody could challenge her version of events. My mother-in-law posted something vague about how excluding a child with special needs is awful, and people sort of put two and two together. My phone lit up with messages from relatives who wanted the full story. Some were on my side. Some thought I was a monster for outing her big secret. My father told me privately that while he felt terrible about how the wedding was ruined, he understood why I did it. My mother said she wished I'd taken a different approach, but also said my sister needed a reality check. Meanwhile, my sister's new husband was apparently reeling from the lies she told him before they got married. I guess he only knew a sanitized version. He confronted her about it, and they argued nonstop. I heard rumors they were going to counseling or thinking about an annulment. I didn't really care either way at that point. I was more focused on my wife and our son, making sure he felt loved and not at fault for any of this. He asked a couple times why his aunt was so upset about his wheelchair. It broke my heart to explain that some people can be shallow. My parents tried to patch things up, but my sister demanded I publicly apologize for ruining her day. I refused. The only apology I'd ever give would be if she acknowledged that banning my son was wrong, but she wouldn't budge. She just kept saying I was the one who started all the drama. A few weeks later, she threatened to sue me for defamation, which was ridiculous. You can't sue someone for telling the truth, and she knew it. She was just throwing a tantrum. During all this, my wife and I decided to move on with our lives. We accepted invitations from my in-laws, had a nice family dinner with them, my father, mother, my uncle, and some cousins who supported us. It felt like a little celebration after the stressful wedding fiasco. My sister heard about it and sent me angry texts about how I was stealing her thunder by hosting a party right after her wedding. I ignored her messages. She was grasping at straws to make me feel bad, but I was done. A month or so later, she texted me from a new number, insisting we meet in person. I was curious if maybe she'd realized how messed up her behavior was. We met at a small coffee shop. She showed up wearing sunglasses, looking exhausted. She started by accusing me of destroying her reputation, telling me the wedding fiasco had caused major fights with her new husband and turned half the family against her. I reminded her that she tried to keep her own nephew away from her wedding because of his wheelchair, and that if she wanted to blame someone, she should look in the mirror. She tried to say she was just worried he'd be uncomfortable and that the room was too packed, but I knew that was a cover-up for her real reason. She then whined that I'd never liked her and was just waiting for a chance to hurt her. I was so done with that nonsense. I told her this was about my son, not some jealous sibling rivalry. I said if she wanted to save her marriage, she should focus on honesty and maybe apologize for once. She finally admitted her husband was ticked off that she hadn't told him all the details of her past. She asked if I'd meet him and say it was all a misunderstanding, that she didn't intentionally lie. I refused. I told her she was on her own. I wasn't going to pretend I made everything up. She got teary, said I had no idea how hard it was for her to maintain a certain image. Then she stormed out, calling me heartless as she left. I just sat there, thinking about how different our lives had become. The family is pretty split now. Some folks think she was wrong but still feel I went too far at the wedding. Others think I did exactly what needed to be done. My father-in-law and mother-in-law are completely on our side, and so are a bunch of cousins who can't believe she tried to exclude a disabled kid. My father and mother remain somewhat torn but lean towards supporting me. They know what my sister did was out of line, and they also know the damage from her old scandal. She and her husband are in couples counseling, last I heard, and she refuses to come to any family gatherings if I'm there. That's her call. I'm not going to beg her to show up. I do think about whether I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have confronted her privately, threatened to tell her secret if she didn't back down. But I doubt it would have changed her mind. She was so fixed on having this perfect day, and the minute she saw my son's wheelchair, she wanted him gone. That's not something I can forgive easily. I don't regret standing up for my kid. He deserves to feel accepted, not like a prop that clashes with someone's wedding colors. If that meant exposing my sister's hypocrisy, then so be it. My son is doing fine now. He has therapy sessions, goes to school, hangs out with friends, and we keep him busy with activities he enjoys. My wife and I have a strong support system. We learn a big lesson about setting boundaries, even with family, and not tolerating people who treat our child as an inconvenience. If my sister ever comes around and truly apologizes, maybe we can find a way forward. But I doubt she will. She's too caught up in blaming me for everything that went wrong on her big day. So yeah, that's the story of how my sister banned my disabled son from her wedding, because she was worried about her photos. I exposed her secret past in front of everyone, and the family is still dealing with the fallout. She says I ruined her life. I say she did it to herself the moment she decided her own nephew's presence was a threat to her wedding theme. I'm at peace with the choice I made. I'd do it again if it meant standing up for my kid and making sure he knows he's not someone to be hidden away. If that makes me the villain in her eyes, I can live with that. It's better than letting my son think we'd ever let anyone treat him like he doesn't belong.